Welcome, Murray.
Thank you, Suma.
How are you today?
I'm doing good, thank you. Doing good, thank you.
I just want to quickly introduce Murray. She is a partner at the Collective Edge, and she's a student of consciousness. And Murray would love to hear how you got started in these topics.
The way I got into these topics was basically having reached a crisis in my life in probably 2017. Without going into the details, but I was feeling at that time that like I didn't get it. I didn't get life. And I kind of felt like I don't belong. I felt totally sort of awkward and thought, I'm not good at this life thing. And I had some real serious thoughts actually about whether I wanted to stay. So I was in a pretty dark place. And by the way, you know, this is after sort of experiencing some pretty great highs in terms of the other things that I had accomplished throughout my younger days. And so anyway, so I basically kind of sat down one time and just said to myself, I've got to figure out what's going on. What is going on? What's going on within me? What's going on within other people? What's going on in the collective? What's going on, who or what is God? Like, I need to know. And so it was being in that sort of situation and positioning those questions to myself that I started on a, not necessarily like a very intentional path. I didn't say to myself, oh, I'm going to go out and study such and such, because I didn't really even know where to start. So I had a period of time where I was taking care of one of my dogs who had had this really massive surgery on a deformed leg. And so I was spending a lot of time on the floor with him in my living room. And I started watching reruns of Dr. Phil. And I just watched it was on a loop. It just kept going and it kept going. And I was getting some sense of things sort of then, or I was getting, clues and hints and things like that were sort of being dropped down to me. But that was something that was helping me to sort of understand more of the human experience. I mean, this is kind of an education, if you will, or I should say anyways, this is the beginning anyways of an education for me that was post being in like college and from a very intellectual perspective. And so that sort of led me, I was seeing a therapist at the time, but I really felt like I wasn't getting anywhere with it. Wasn't getting any traction. I wasn't having any major insights or breakthroughs. So I stopped that for a while. And I just kind of said, I'm gonna kind of live my life. And I'd put out a advertisement online for someone to bring a dog over to play with a dog that I had offered to foster, who, when I brought home, he got loose in my backyard and I couldn't catch him. And I had like trainers come over to see him and they said, he's semi-feral. And I was like, what is that? Anyways, so a woman who responded to that ad, she happened to be a psychologist and she had two gorgeous Portuguese water dogs. And we sat in my backyard. And we started to become friends. And I had shared with her some of what my struggles were. And she said to me, Marie, it's not supposed to be like that, psychology, going in for therapy. It's not supposed to be like that. And she referred me to a friend of hers. And so this is where I had my next sort of big insight. When I went in to see this person, what was highlighted for me was the different aspects of self. And in my younger days, like many people, I had experienced, a pretty traumatic sort of upbringing. Unfortunately, my parents had their own challenges. And so at about 14 or so, I had to really fend for myself. And I was living at different friends' house, whoever would let me sort of stay and give me some sort of protection. And that the point of that anyways is to sort of highlight in this aspects of self conversation. It was to realize that there was this survival self of me, and that in a way I was still running and operating with this survival self of me. Now I have a whole lot more to really say about our survival selves, looking at it from, an adult sort of development, and also a couple of different models, but without digressing too far into that and staying focused on my story. We went through an exercise anyways to get in touch with that survival Marie, and to thank her and to say, you can relax now. You can put your feet up on a desk, just go into the other room, relax. And I promise you that if I need you again, I will call. And that was a big kind of realization for me. And then it was interesting because for me anyways, then I thought, oh shit, like, do I have multiple personalities or something like that? So that was a really sort of funny dialogue that I had with myself. And of course, that's not the case. Now my dog's trying to get outside. I'm gonna try and, but I'd say another thing that happened in that point, Suma, was a sort of connecting with my body. It brought me back. So I'd realized that I'd been living in this mind, in my own head, this monkey mind, and it brought me back into my body. And so that was another sort of big shift. I had in my previous life explored a lot of different careers. I knew I had a good rational mind when I was in my earlier days. I'd started in programming, and then I moved into technical project management. And we'll come back, I think, probably to some of this story. But I felt very squeezed by sort of the corporate experience at that time. And I thought, I'm just not good at this. And I left that. And then I started to explore another career, which was in interior design. And that was a blast, because then I got really in touch with my creative side, which was like, wow, this is like so much fun. I didn't necessarily think I was good at this, but I am. And the point of bringing that into it was that at this stage, then I started to really think again. I started to think about what was the career, or what was going to be my path? Where was I going to go sort of next? And at the same time, I was sort of having conversations about trying to get in touch with God. What is God? And I started going to church, and I was very active in it. And I was like, I volunteered and helped shuttle people from the parking lot to the church. I was doing Bible study and things. And I kept asking these questions like, what is the Holy Spirit? I don't get this. So this was running sort of in parallel with me thinking about my career. And then in early 2019, I heard about a movement that's called the Agile movement. Now, the Agile movement is it's a movement within corporate environments. You probably are familiar with it, but for those who aren't, it's more moving to, like, see, if we had like command and control at one point, and then you move sort of to plan and predict. And then Agile is kind of another evolution of that. And you can maybe see anyways with each parts of those evolution, we're getting closer and closer to our humanity in a corporate sort of environment. And when I started looking into it, I said, oh my God, like they get it. We're human. And I thought, oh, holy shit. Because I was looking back at my experience in the corporate environment before and thinking as a technical project manager, like, I'm not good at this. I suck at this. Like my projects don't even start on time, on budget and in scope, you know? But I kept getting feedback from people that they were like, oh my God, Marie, you're like the glue to this team. We want you to stay in it. Like, oh, you know, and I just thought, really? And so with Agile, to me, I was like, oh, that's it. You know, okay, great. Now I can really bring like my personality side of it and the relationship cultivating thing into sort of this movement. And so then I sort of became like a dog with a bone. And I started taking courses and sort of following people. And this was, of course, in 2019 when we could still meet in person. I lived in the Bay Area at the time. So I was going to meetups, you know, volunteering with organizations. And there were, towards middle and the last half of 2019, sort of two big things that happened for me. One was I went to what's called the Agile Alliance Conference, which was in Washington, D.C. And that's like 2,500 people getting together. I mean, it's a huge thing. I mean, there's 10 tracks going on almost all the time. It was like, whoa. And I kind of did what I normally do, which is like, okay, right, I'm here. What are we going to do? You know, like, let's sort of do this. And what do I mean sort of by that? I mean, I would go into the rooms anyways, where people were having the really big conversations. And I'd just sit there maybe as an observer. And if I saw an opportunity anyways to give my input or perspective, or to ask a question, or to approach someone, to make connections sort of with thought leaders. It wasn't from a like an agenda or anything like that sort of perspective. It was more like I want to be involved in doing the deepest work I possibly can. So that started, you know, put me in a certain trajectory, because actually at that conference, I met on more of an energetic level my partner in the business that I do today. Another thing that happened was I started to become what really started to open up my reality was being introduced to really big things like a modern day philosophy, which is like integral or spiral dynamics, which helps us to sort of have a context anyways from which to see each moment and how it's unfolding. That's one sort of part of that. And then another part of it is to see that there are stages of development that each of us go through as an individual, and that we go through as a collective. And it was like so illuminating, because I could look back on my life and see like, oh my God, like I can vividly remember myself being sort of at that stage, and it was based on sort of values. And I knew that those were the things that I valued at that time, and that was my way of processing life and the experiences that I was having and the decisions then that I was making. And it put me sort of into a place to understand where I was today. So the big insight on that anyways was that it gave me a way to understand the way that I thought. And that was a huge relief. There is always this sort of line that I think we're dancing between, just, you know, you are whole and you are perfect exactly as you are, no need to figure anything out. And then at the same time as our human experience for a lot of us is also sort of a need to understand, well, what exactly is that? And so these answers started to come to me. And so it gave me sort of, you know, a place where I could put my foot on the ground. And I felt that I saw where I was and where I might be going, and understood some of how that process unfolds, some of the pitfalls of it. So that was one thing. And then another thing was complexity. You know, complexity is such an interesting subject, I think, because while we can look at the world today and realize, of course, that it's becoming more and more and increasingly sort of complex, and that it can sort of seem maybe overwhelming, but there are ways to be able to navigate complexity. And what is fantastic anyways about my experience with this sort of subject anyways, was that it was ways of being able to navigate complexity, I think, in a sort of most kind of meaningful or purposeful or experiential sort of way, requires you to be really present. To take the moments, it's so funny, I want to say like to take the moments sort of in small chunks, but like how do you chunk up a moment? But you can chunk up, I think, moments, but it's really seeing or series of moments and things. And navigating complexity, it actually really does sort of require some of that. Of course, also being able to expand out and to see a much bigger, reality, which we can talk about maybe later. But I think so in having been exposed to these things at that time, then what I sort of started to experience anyways was like this sort of kind of psychoanalytic thing sort of happening, or it was interesting because in one way, at one point in my life, I kind of thought, I don't get this. Like, I don't get life. I don't think I'm smart. How does anybody think that I'm smart? I don't get this. Like, I don't. And I started to, anyways, I realized that, holy shit, like, no, I actually get this stuff. This is great. Oh, okay. And I didn't necessarily had to work too hard at it too. It just fell into place. And I think that's what I mean by, I'm saying psychoanalytic, but I think there might be a different word for it. So I apologize. At the same time, these are all sort of the concepts and things like that, right, that I've been sort of talking about. But then what was happening on my interiors? Well, on my interiors, I was feeling like my identity kind of just being blown apart in a way, like sort of in a way I realized, wait a second, I've been kind of living with a series of labels kind of on myself, like, who am I? Oh, okay, well, I'm this and I'm that, and I believe this and I believe that and things. And those things started really falling away. And it was really interesting because my experience with them at the time was that, like, holy cow, this is like really unsettling. Like, I don't know if I would necessarily call it sort of a dark night of the soul type thing. And by the way, at the time that this is sort of happening, we've gone into 2020, which of course, you're looking out and you're seeing, structures that you thought were always sort of going to be there, crumbling or sort of falling apart. And it was just like, holy shit. I mean, like, all of reality is really being sort of challenged or questioned right now. So I was kind of going through this dual process on the inside, and then I was observing it happening on the outside, and it was like, wow, this is incredible. Some ways frightening in the way that I sort of went through a period anyways where, like, the way that my body felt in space was something that I had never really felt before. And I kind of thought that with every step that I'm taking, I felt like I was kind of walking on clouds, and I wasn't really sure, like, what if I put my foot down on this next step, is it going to go through this cloud, or is this, okay? It was just so kind of surreal in that way. Potentially ungrounding, but I really think that it was mostly just sort of a reorganization anyways of my, what do I want to call it? My perception of life. Which is usually not just something that happens with the flip of a switch, but it's a process, I think. It was for me. So in that time in 2020, I was very fortunate in that I was able to throw myself into tons of classes, and sort of really big and mind-bending classes. And it was kind of one after another. I don't even know. I mean, like, I need to go back and actually rewatch some of it, because there's no possible way I could necessarily have taken all of it in. But I threw myself sort of into them anyways. And at the same time, I had made a connection to a person who had been really big in the agile movement. So coming back to that. And being in sort of dialogue with that person. And it was interesting because the experience that I was having with this person was that, like, wow, like, we were sort of thought partners, and we could have these like really deep and sort of deep conversations, and then go really esoteric and talk about structures and models, and like, oh, bing bong, and feel the relationship between things, and shared a deep friendship with the person at the same time. And that person is my partner in our company, the Collective Edge. And in 2021, it sort of became kind of evident, like, wait a second, like, I should probably work for the Collective Edge. And then it was interesting, because then another sort of question that we kind of had to answer was, well, what sort of role makes sense? Which is an interesting question anyways, because I do think that while I have a title, especially in a startup sort of situation, and really my preference anyways in life is to do what's ever needed in the moment. And if I'm the person to be able to do that, or if that just needs done, okay, then let's see what I can do. So we started the Collective Edge. And what does that mean? It was interesting, because then we had to have this sort of question, a real questioning of ourselves. Well, if the Collective Edge, and thinking about an organization as a collection of humans and of their consciousness, then that there's this shared space, right, of that a lot of times in certain, well, it creates a relationship sort of entity, excuse me. So in dialogue, like you and I right now, you are you and I am me. And then in this shared space, we have this relationship. And what does the relationship sort of want to do is a question for us in every moment, to have the relationship come closer together, or for a relationship to, of course, move apart. But anyways, taking some of that same sort of mentality to the Collective Edge, like, what is the Collective Edge? If the Collective Edge is sort of an entity like that, well, then what is it? Okay. For my partner and I, we sort of share this same sort of process in life anyways, which is kind of living it at the edge. Always sort of pushing a little bit. So what is sort of the edge anyways of our own and of our individual sort of consciousness, but also what is the edge of the consciousness of the collective? And how do we work in that space? Because the purpose behind that being to expand humans' perception of reality. Hitting pause just for a second right there and jumping back to my personal story. The reason why to me that's important is because when I remember in the part of the story that I told you about feeling very small and very lost and like, I don't get it. I don't understand this. That part of me, what I was able to look back on and see then was that I was trying to survive in a very small piece of reality. If reality is a pie and it's huge, I had an awareness of just a small slice of it. And I was just trying to survive in this little space here and was bumping right on the fringes of both sides of that. And it was literally sort of manifesting in me as tension, and I was experiencing anxiety and depression, right? And with everything that had sort of unfolded since then, and it most especially, of course, these things that I've shared that I learned about, the way that those expanded my perception of reality was a huge relief. Like, I got to a point where I was like, I don't actually need antidepressants or any anxiety medicine. And I was able to come off of those. And how could, well, let me just say, I think that I think anyways, that there are a lot of humans on the planet who are experiencing the same thing, that they are only aware of this narrow sort of view of reality, and that's what they're trying to survive in. And they're experiencing the same sort of byproducts of that type of trying to live. And so part of sort of the purpose and mission anyways of the Collective Edge is to give anyone who feels attracted to or is interested the opportunity to have their reality expanded, in hopes, of course, that they will experience some of the same as what I did, and that relief and a ability to reorient to life and to feel alive and thriving. That, of course, is for the individual. And then, of course, we know that there's all kinds of other crises that, our humanity sort of faces today. I have very interesting, I think, sort of perspective on that, but you can't deny, of course, that some of the situation that we find ourselves in still, but also in the Collective Edge and its mission sort of and purpose is also for people who feel drawn to work in these other areas. And what I mean by that is, it's kind of like life's work or world work is another way. It's just helping them to connect anyways to a deeper sense and deeper essence of themselves, to connect to their own purpose. And it's so funny because I also have a perspective anyways on what I think most everybody's purpose is. And but to connect with that purpose and to make it something so that they can get themselves to a place where they are doing fulfilling work. I can tell some more about what we're doing later, but is that so that's what's brought me to today.
Thank you for sharing big milestones in your experience. And going back to your experience, I know we briefly talked about this, where you, even before getting into some of this programming stuff or tech stuff, you were before working in nursing.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that? Because I was quite intrigued that how you transitioned from the nursing world to tech. I would love to hear what was your experience in the nursing world.
Okay. This is okay. When I was in high school, I had a like a profound sort of love, if you will, for anatomy, biology, chemistry. In my family too, I had two nurses. My grandmother and my aunt were nurses. And when I came out of high school, also seeing sort of a relationship sort of, gift or something to that effect, right, in me, I thought, oh, I'm going to go into nursing. And so I started nursing school. And I loved the learning of it and what I learned. And then I got out, I had basically my first time to go out into the hospital to do some sort of rounds, if you will. And I was assigned to a patient to go in and take his vitals and to give him a bath. And while I was in there, Suma, the person said some very, what's the word? Inappropriate things. And I felt super awkward and uncomfortable. And basically I walked out of that room, and I won't forget this, because I'm pretty sure that as I was walking down that hallway out of that hospital, like, yeah, okay, nursing's not for me, that you could kind of hear my shoes on the hallway, tick, 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 tick. And my nursing instructor was, Marie, wait, from behind me. And I was like, no, this is not for me. So it was very brief. And then I had to look at, oh, well, crap, now what am I going to do? And through a series of other sort of just trying out other jobs anyways, this was, gosh, back in, wow, a long time ago. Oh God, 1994, 1995 or something to that effect. Still that sort of rational, analytical mind of mine was really very online. And I ended up taking a job where I transitioned into doing computer systems and needing to change tapes and things to that effect. And so that's where I got my first sort of introduction into the technical world. And then I went to school at night for that.
And you also shared about how you had to travel a lot when you were very young, where you stayed at many different places. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So some of the traveling or staying in different places when I was young was as a result of needing a place, to stay. And then my family, though, had we were from Ohio, and we had moved to the state of South Carolina, Columbia, the capital. And the really cool thing about that was that I was from a very small town in Ohio. And when I moved to this other high school, it was huge. It was like 2,500 people, and it was incredibly diverse. And I was like, wow, like my whole sort of like, my reality got blown up, and in a super very good way. And my whole extrovert and friendly side of me really came out. So like, I would say that was one of the first kind of experiences anyways, like as a child, having to make that kind of a big shift, right? Because you're being, sort of uprooted and put into a completely new environment and things. So that being sort of important, because eventually I did move back to Ohio. And then I moved back to a big city, or I moved to a city in Ohio called Cincinnati. And from there, and I was in the IT world, and a colleague of mine invited me to join his startup company in La Jolla, California. And I was like, what? Yeah, okay. Like, and I'm not sure I'd even been to California at the time, but I mean, for me, I have personally this very adventurous sort of approach to life kind of anyway. So I was like, well, yeah. And I had 2 cats at the time. 2 cats in the car, and I moved across the country and lived in San Diego then for about 7 years. And it's interesting to think about, when we move from one place to another, I mean, just how much everything in our environment really changes, and the amount of reorientation it takes, not just to sort of the people and the surroundings, but obviously you have the landscape, and there's a different culture, right, that you're even being exposed to. And I think it's important, and I'll share sort of why anyways, for people, when you move, there's a tendency, I always had a tendency anyways, to think it was something just so simple. Oh, I just have one address one day and I have another address the next day. But there's also this whole sort of settling, I think, that your whole being goes through. And so the move, it takes time to go through that adjustment. And I just wouldn't, my advice to anyone making big moves like that, of course, is to just really settle down and notice that adjustment happening, and give yourself time and space for that to really play out. So I spent 7 years in San Diego, and then I took a trip to London. It was my first time being able to go abroad. And I was there for 2.5 weeks. And my experience was, oh my God, there's a whole nother world out here. Crap, I have to move here. Okay. So I went back to San Diego, and I transitioned. I was at the time a director of implementation for that startup, and I transitioned to a contractor role. And I basically took everything that I owned then, and I said, I got rid of it, sort of sold it, gave it away. And whatever I could move in suitcases is what I took with me to London. And of course, then I'm having this whole other, big experience. And how old was I at this time? Probably around 32, I think. I'm having this whole other, experience with all these different cultures. I mean, like lots of different cultures, right? Into this one city. And I loved it. And it's interesting because for me, the old world just really resonates. And I think, that's true for some people more than others. Not for everyone, of course. Everybody's got a different ancestry, right, that they come from, and where their ancestors are sort of from. And I think you will find probably more of a resonance in some places simply because of that. But anyways, it felt really very much at home for me. And while I was there, I started working, doing technical project management for Deloitte in identity and access management programs. And that was, in one way, such a great experience, because I was on the tube every day going to work. And, in that, I'd put my earbuds in, and I'd have some like Black Eyed Peas or something, playing. And then I'm dancing, going down the thing, down the walkways, etc. And then I also did a big project for them over in the Netherlands, in Utrecht. Really appreciated that space. And then I moved back to the States.
Why did you move back?
When?
Well, why?
That was actually, so that was with my ex-husband. And for him, he was British. And in his role that he had in his organization, which was also technical, he wanted to, well, he had been over Europe and EMEA and Africa, and he wanted to have an experience anyways of being over the States. So it's interesting because to some extent I was sort of ready to move back to the States, but I think if it had been a decision completely just mine and my own or something, I'm not sure that I would have. I think I might have stayed. But you know, you do what's best for the relationship or the long sort of term thing at that time. And so we moved back. And we moved to San Diego. And then 6 months later, we moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. And then like a year later, we moved to San Francisco. And then we moved a couple of places in San Francisco. And at that time, that was about 8 really big moves in 5 years, like really, really, really big moves. And so this kind of comes back to what I was saying before in terms of not taking lightly the effect that a move, especially, big ones like that, have on your being. Because I was probably a little, maybe sort of unconscious to that. And those are some of the things that led up to me being, in the place that I was describing in the beginning of the call, where I just felt completely effing lost. So. Mm-hmm. Wait, I'm so sorry. If I could carry that on, actually, because this is where it also gets a little more, or it gets interesting too, I think, is that, so last year in May, I sold my home outside of the Bay, and I packed my 2 dogs and my 2 cats into my car to drive across the country for the second time. I took a different route, which was kind of cool. I was like, I got to see the other part of the States now. And I decided to move to Asheville, North Carolina. And I had all my things put into storage, and I rented a fully furnished place. And that was like the beginning of a really different sort of experience, right? Because now I don't have my things. And it was really cool for a little while, like, oh no, this is great, this is great. But then that is also another sort of adjustment or a practice anyways, right? Because we know that today there's so much, and I know in my past, like me being so dependent upon having my things or something, that in a way those things, I might have had the impression anyways that they had some degree of me feeling happy or satisfied. And that is not where it is. And so that started this sort of nomadic sort of journey, if you will. So living in Asheville then without my things, and in somebody else's home and whatnot, and just kind of chilling out and getting to know the area and think about what I might do next. And then my mother came down with a cancer diagnosis, and she lives in Texas, in Granbury, Texas. And this was in July that she was diagnosed. And it was kind of interesting because the whole family was like, oh shit, like, okay, what are we going to do now? And then, I was sitting there one day and I thought, wait a second, I'll just move there. And it was sort of funny because I had said, I don't think I would ever move to Texas. But here it was. I found myself loading my 2 dogs and 2 cats into the car again. And I've been living in, again, fully furnished sort of place. And yeah. And I feel myself a lot of times like this sort of tension, like, God, I'm really feeling like I need roots or some grounding. And oh, you know what I do? I want my things back. But that is kind of part of the challenge anyways, because I don't want to make a decision that's purely based on sort of something like that. This is where you have these feelings, right? And these emotions, right? That are sort of clouding a potentially, excuse me, clouding sort of a judgment or something, and might make it seem reality a little more clearly, and with as most objectivity sort of as you can. And so the challenge to me anyways has been, all right, no, don't rush it, that I will know when and where and what is the right time for me to put down those roots. And right now it is to appreciate the many advantages that my life offers me today, and hold, that yes, there may be some longing for my things, and that is okay. So there.
How does all these experiences tie into your future work that you want to do in consciousness? Like what are you planning for in that world?
That is a great question. I see a variety of ways to be able to approach the answer. And so let me start by saying that in these experiences, deliberate, right, intentional sort of experiences where what I think I want to say about it is that there is a sort of a place that I feel that myself and what in my work and what I hear other people trying to get to, and the word that I'll use for that is peace. And peace, the peace that I mean anyways, is the inner peace. And I have a sense that it is from sort of that inner peace, that is the place that we want to be at, preferably, ideally, that's the place that we want to be at when we need to make decisions about certain actions that we're going to take for whatever. And all of my 47 years and the places that I've lived and the people that I've encountered and the relationships that I've been in and the hardships and the ups and the downs, the good things and the bad things, the times when I've behaved in ways that I look back and I think, oh God, and the situation that I find myself in today as a bigger sort of picture, and even in this conversation, the point is to get to that point of peace, to take all of that, to realize all of that is all a part of, and this very moment is all a part of my life experience. Me and this person that they call Marie sitting here having this conversation with you is a collection of all of those things feeding into this moment. And how and peace is the place that I want to cultivate inside of myself. And I think every moment life gives you an opportunity to be in that place or to get back to that place now. So that's my own personal sort of challenge. But then how does that help? How do I think about that and how it reflects in the work? Right? How does that manifest in the work? Well, there's a lot of different ways. And without me necessarily going into like any model or something to that effect, but I'll just say that in the things that we sort of talk about or teach in our classes or that we have in our events, it is, as I was mentioning before, to give people an opportunity to have this expanded sense of awareness or of reality, and an elevated to grow their own sort of consciousness, my consciousness, their consciousness, all of our consciousness. And I believe that as a part of doing that, that peace becomes a
Side effects.
yeah, right. It becomes a part of the journey, the road, right? And yeah, right, a side effect. You could look at it that way too. And so, and I think there's one other thing I would say is that, well, actually, no, I won't say anything else right now. Oh, wait, I think it'll come up anyways. I have a sense.
How was your experience at Science and Consciousness conference?
Oh, yeah, great. So it's interesting because in what I realized, everybody has, of course, their own gifts, their own little unique gifts that we're all here to sort of, uncover and discover. And one of my gifts seems to be in sort of creating a relationship. And then I have this little sort of seeing that anyways, it sort of cultivates this little intuition too, that kind of pulls me to different things and different people. And so anyways, I kind of let that be a part of my process and my guide of what to do, where to go, who to work with, etc., things to that effect. And I came across a gentleman by the name of Peter Mary, and he's doing like really great work, Suma. And he was doing a class anyways on energetics. And then in taking that class, I learned about an event that he was putting on, which was the Science and Consciousness Conference, which is like, what? I mean, ooh, that sounds really neat. And it was in Broughton, in Skipton, I should say, the UK, which is kind of in the middle of the UK. And in this, I turned up, and it's like this huge stately manor, like old manor, and sort of like a castle or whatever. And so you felt like you're kind of being transported a little bit back in time. But in that conference, had some direct experiences with. So first of all, of course, there's the people that I met and the different presentations and things that we heard. It was a beautiful and magical sort of place. But then we did like experiments. And see, the thing about sort of consciousness and science and consciousness is that, like, consciousness just is, it is. And it's interesting because us sort of as humans, we want to know what is consciousness. And so in a way, science is trying to help to put some sort of whatever language, words, concepts, model, whatever, mathematics, etc., to sort of consciousness. And I don't know if we'll ever figure all of it out, but that's what as humans we seem compelled to do. And so anyways, at this conference, some of the experiments that we did were like remote viewing. Have you heard of remote viewing?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So where you would partner up and somebody would go and walk in the woods and you have no idea what it is that they're looking at or what they're doing. You don't even know, anything. And you're just kind of sitting around, and your job is to just kind of sit there and just sort of wait for maybe an image or something to pop into your mind. And then you make sort of a note or draw a picture or whatever. And this is really looking at, right, that this space that I used to, and what a lot of people think is just, oh, this is just empty space. No, it's actually filled with information. And we as humans probably had a great capacity for being able to sense the information in this space. And then we kind of lost some of that, but remote viewing is an attempt anyways to show us that no, it is here and we can send this information back and forth. So there was that. And then also there was a woman named Brenda Doon who had done a lot of work at the Princeton, PEAR, forget exactly what that stands for, but basically these were sort of consciousness studies that were happening back in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, this is stuff that it's interesting because we've been talking about it for a long time. And in a lot of ways, a lot of this stuff has already sort of been proved, but we still have to keep having these conversations and find different ways to do it. So anyways, in another sort of experiment, there was with these random event generators. So these random event generators, basically doing experiments where we would be told, okay, so it's going to be this node anyways, it's sort of tracking on a computer screen and this thing just sort of moving across the screen, and we'd be told, try to get it to move up or to move down. And so just with the power of your sort of mind or your intention anyways, the challenge was to see if you could get it to move in the direction. And it was like so fascinating, because one thing I would say is that the less that you think about it, the easier it is to do. So you can have this effect, right, across space. And but as soon as you start sort of thinking about it with your sort of rational mind, it starts to really get in the way and will affect those results. And I've got a kitty cat that's crying outside real quick. Let me just let him in. Sorry.
Stories.
Made some really great friends there too, and people that I continue to stay in close contact with and continue to do work with.
Were there any fun results out of these experiments, like remote viewing?
Yeah. It was really astounding actually to see. And we actually did another experiment with it just a few weeks ago and online. And but it's astonishing actually that how many people were actually able, like for me and the person that I was assigned to, I got like this image in my mind of this boom, like it hit me like out of sort of nowhere. And it was this image of a big leaf. And I just saw this huge, big leaf. And I drew it, and there was a sort of special characteristic in it too that I had drawn into it. And my partner confirmed that, yes, that's something that he was looking at. But then other people had the same sort of experience and a little more specific. So it was really remarkable actually how many times you can actually do this. And there is a way to do it, but you have to kind of experience it. It's interesting. I think everybody has a different way in which they can receive this information over the space. And really, it's something that everybody should sort of try and cultivate their own. They'll have a sense anyways of when they get that impression that that's the thing or not.
Yeah, that sounds really fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good.
Is there anything else you would like to share today, Marie? I feel like some of by the way, I really appreciate how transparent you are and how like for sharing some of these big milestones in your life experiences. So is there anything else I may not have covered today?
Hmm. I think I feel really good. I think we've done a really great job actually of covering quite a bit. And thank you very much for acknowledging, how much I've shared. I think it's really important actually for us to be able to open up and be really vulnerable with each other so that we can understand this, appreciate the shared human experience that we all have. I think the only other thing that I will kind of share anyways is that, so now I have 2 dogs and 3 cats. One of my dogs, as I mentioned earlier, is a semi-feral. I call him recovering semi-feral now, because 2 years after he was loose in my backyard, and we thought he was 4 when I brought him home, we know that he spent the 4 years in his life outside without being around humans then. And like, what an incredible experience that has been with him, like to really realize, I think in a situation like his, even just looking at him was an act of aggression for him. He felt that just even looking at him for a while was something that, he couldn't really take. What do I want to say? I think about that. I think the point is that the ways at which we as human animals come out of ourselves, and the way that sort of change and things like that happens, it's in these little small scale, small steps sorts of things. And so I would want to say to anyone that, like, regardless of where you are today, know that that's not where you're going to be in X amount of time, and that don't worry, everything that you need and anything that's going to happen and or how life is going to progress for you it will come to you. And to be patient, have a lot of compassion for yourself. So there's sort of saying that in general. And then the only other thing I'll say is that this is coming back to what I was mentioning earlier in terms of that peace. What I have learned anyways is that with him, if I was in a situation, or if I was feeling internal angst or really busy on the inside, it had a direct effect on him. And like getting him to come into the house after a while, right, when I could even like let him out without a leash on, I have to really stay very centered in myself in order for him to feel that it's safe for him to come across that threshold. And this is speaking about him and a dog and a human, but I think that there's a lot of important lessons in that for us to take in, even relating to human to human. And I'll let everybody make take their own thoughts away from that and contemplate that themselves.
Thank you for this conversation. What is your contact website? Would it be thecollectiveedge.com?
The collective cultivatingedge.com. Yes. And we've just launched a community. We were doing it very literally just the other day. And so that'll be coming up and online. So the point behind that, Suma, is like to give people a place for sort of purpose, passion, and practice to come together. So help us through the transitions and development. Yeah.
I will link that in the description.
That's very kind.
For
Thank you.
your time, Marie.
My pleasure. Thank you, Suma. Thank you for your work.